Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Ask Me Anything event on HashiCorp Terraform on Google Cloud. My name is Lauren, and I'm the content manager for the Google Cloud community. Joining us today are leaders from Google Cloud and HashiCorp who will be taking us through the content and answering your questions live. Questions are encouraged, so please feel free to add those into the YouTube chat box, and we'll be sure to get to them in the chat or at the end of the presentation. We do have a number of pre-submitted questions, so we'll be doing our best to go through each of those as well, but we'll be sure to get to your live questions. And for any of those that we don't get to live, we'll be publishing a recap blog post in the Google Cloud community, which you can find a link to in the YouTube description. And with that, we're seeing a lot of people coming, joining. We'd love to hear where you're joining us from. And I know there's going to be some questions about the game access code. So stay tuned. We will share that with you. We're really excited to participate and get started with the game ourselves. With that, though, I will hand it over to the team to take us through the content today.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. Next slide. Oh, go ahead. So today we're going to basically cover the Google Cloud's commitment to Terraform, HashiCorp Terraform on Google Cloud, and you'll have HashiCorp speaking on a couple of things on their end, and then we'll do a bunch of question and answers, and then we'll cover some what's next in resources. All right, so from my end, I'm Arslan Saeed. I'm the PM for Terraform at Google Cloud. And what I really want to share with everyone today is Google Cloud's commitment to Terraform. I think it's safe to say that Google is all in on Terraform. There's a lot of work that we're doing, and it kind of starts with the provider. So from the core aspect, we're working on the Terraform provider. If you've already used Terraform on Google Cloud, you know that it's available already. There's a lot of resources you can cover, but we're making it even better. The improved response time. We're actually getting we have a Terraform team at Google that basically works on the Terraform resources, but now we're also getting all the service teams involved as well, and so they'll be helping to contribute and answering your responding to your bugs and feature requests and everything else. So over the next year, you'll see a much faster response time there. When it comes to discovery, right, like we actually have this Terraform new docs page, which is going to eventually become like a landing zone for all things Terraform. So you have one-stop shop to come to. It'll give you all the information you need, and we'll make it better over time. So definitely share your feedback on that. You obviously have the Terraform registry that's still available, and you'll discover modules and our provider and everything else there. Next. In terms of enablement, we have a jumpstart. So enablement basically is like, how do we help you learn more about Terraform? And there's a lot of resources that are available. And after the session, we are going to send you, a follow-up that'll give you all these links and everything else. The Terraform Jumpstart is a 3-day interactive workshop, and it's going to basically, be an on-prem with 2 trainers. We have about 15 attendees that can join, and we limit remote folks because we just find it like, we get a lot more engagement when people are on-prem, so you have that option. And then we have Terraform Cloud Skill Boost, previously known as was it Quick Labs. And these are on-demand courses, and they all have 4.5, 5 stars, thousands of reviews. They do really well, and it also has the Terraform certification training, which is part of the game as well that you'll see later. In terms of authoring, right, we basically have these Terraform Jumpstart solutions. So you may see it in your console already if it's available to you. I think it's in public preview now. So we have like different options that are backed by Terraform configuration. So imagine you want to launch a 3-tier app, a load balance VM or log analysis pipelines, Java apps, maybe secure CI/CD pipelines. So there's various options that you have to like one-click deploy, which will make things a lot easier for you. We have Cloud Foundation Toolkit and Cloud Foundation Fabric. So these are modules basically. So the toolkit is pre-built, modules. They're opinionated modules off the shelf. They're generally grouped together by product, and they're consumed via GitHub or the Terraform registry. And then Cloud Foundation Fast Fabric, which is basically allowing you to have less opinionated modules, right? They're highly flexible, and they're usually grouped by logical entities, and they're consumed by via GitHub. And then we also have Terraform samples available. So they're like small snippets of Terraform code that you can use to deploy and test resources out as well. And then when it comes to deploying and managing, right? So we have like an option where you can kind of use Terraform plus Cloud Build plus GitOps, and we have a whole guide on how you can use those, these tools to kind of have your own pipeline and infrastructure pipeline and deploy on Google Cloud. We're also talking with HashiCorp on like Terraform Enterprise and Terraform Cloud integrations, and how to make that experience better. They're obviously available. Enterprise is available in the marketplace today. We're working on making that integration even better in the future. And then Blueprint Controller, right? That's basically like a way that will make it easier to have Terraform deployments on Google Cloud. But there's more to come on that in the future. Then we have Google Cloud, Google G Cloud Terraform Vet, which is in public preview right now. So if you're familiar with OPA and policy as code, right? So this is our native solution that will provide you that policy as code and put guardrails around your infrastructure. So like you can avoid things like somebody deploying 1,000 VMs instead of one VM, right? And there's lots of other things you can do there. If you're familiar with HashiCorp Sentinel, it's a similar solution to that, but this is native onto Google, and it's OPA based as well. And then in terms of support, right, like we're doing a lot more when it comes to support. And so, when you file a Terraform request, right, someone's going to look at it. In the past, it may or may not have been resolved as fast, right? And over the next year, we're going to be doing a lot more to make sure support is really, really great. So feel free to reach out to your account teams, file bugs. When you have like 100 plus, kind of thumbs up on these issues, we're gonna be looking at them. But at the end of the day, if you have Google Cloud support, you reach out to us. We'll do our best to kind of help you out. And then Terraform First Class, I don't think that's the official name. It's an internal name. But what that really means is if you have HashiCorp support and you have Google Cloud support, you're going to get a better experience in terms of just support in general. And we have a collaboration that we will work to solve your problems faster. And so all of this to say that Google is committed to Terraform, and we're doing a lot more, and we'd love to get your feedback. And with that, I'll pass it on to Ray.
I really appreciate that. So I was asked to spend a few minutes, 10 minutes, walking through the various offerings of Terraform and how you can consume those. But first, a little bit about the numbers. You wouldn't be on this call if you didn't know what Terraform is, but the provider for Google Cloud Platform is growing pretty rapidly. There's 250 million downloads of HashiCorp Stack alone, but of that particular provider, 276 million. And we've seen over about 58 million already within 2023, and that number is growing. Even this month, there's been 12 million downloads, and we have a lot of Googlers actively supporting that particular provider. And so if you're interested which particular resources you are using, you can find that the Project Factory has been getting about 12 million downloads. IAM is a very popular set of resources to be configured via Terraform, as well as gcloud. Why don't we go to the next slide? So how can you consume Terraform? There's three major flavors. One is the open source edition that we all know and love, and is how most people start to get involved using the technology. It's a binary written in Go, and you can set up your own scaffolding and plug it into your CI/CD pipelines. And it's pretty decentralized without a whole lot of the governance or policy that Arslan was mentioning. There's also a SaaS-based edition called Terraform Cloud. It's at app.terraform.io. But this allows us to be able to do a little bit more complexity, which I'll get into a bit. But and then last but not least, many Google providers typically like to self-host, even on GCP, and that's called Terraform Enterprise. And this is for larger enterprises that need to be able to scale and have data sovereignty and compliance issues or concerns, and want to make sure that it's highly available for everyone. Next slide. So, this is a build. Can you click through? I'll just walk right through it. The whole concept is that you go as an open source practitioner to terraform.io downloads, and you'll be able to consume all sorts of modules that are pre-configured out there from the registry. You define your infrastructure as code within .tf files, whether that's a main and your outputs and your variables. And you'll kick off a Terraform init in order to be able to download the particular providers. Keep on clicking through. There's a You'll do a Terraform plan as a verb to make sure that you'll see what is actually out there that you've targeted within your artifacts. Does it exist? Does it not? Do I need to change it? Do I need to delete it? And then once I feel happy with what that looks like, I'll do a Terraform apply to be able to invoke those APIs, and I'll save the state file and configure my cloud infrastructure, my SaaS systems, my on-premise systems that I might have targeted within my infrastructure as code, both on the public clouds as well as the private data center. And this works great for tactical small teams or adoptions of a particular cloud. Next slide. And let's just build this whole slide out as well, please. But there's also some things that you have to be careful about. A little far. You don't necessarily have an API, so a lot of this has to be done via scripting or manual execution or wrapped by another process. State files is something that you'll find is one of the most popular topics on Stack Overflow of, one, how do I protect them? How do I maintain them? What happens if I lose them? And what can I do to make sure that I have a good pattern for my teams to collaborate with them when I'm using the open source edition? And the last thing that you do need to care about is your credentials and where you store them, whether they're environment variables or hard-coded. And if we click onto the next slide, this works great for smaller teams when you have your own laptops, so that you can actually dedicate some systems around that with a version control system to hold your state and store that away. You'll find that many of the teams have a challenge scaling once you have 2 or 3 or 4 different lines of business or projects starting to actually implement this. There's not a centralized spot for visibility, collaboration, or reuse necessarily. So if we go to the next slide, this is the capabilities you'll find within the cloud-based and the enterprise-based editions. We're not going to go through each one in detail. I want to make sure we get to your Q&A mostly. But the concept of having golden workflows and being able to manage those and making sure that we have producers and consumers with the principle of least privilege. So people who can actually add golden copies or sensible defaults are your subject matter experts, while the app dev teams can then consume those quickly and fall into the pit of success, let's say. That you don't have to worry about state. It's just handled by the systems itself, that you have private registries for those golden copies. And for those groups that don't want to learn Terraform, there's ways for them to be able to consume it by just filling in a form and pushing a button, just add water, and you have your full GCP infra set up. Arslan mentioned a lot of the concepts around policy and security. There's a technology called Sentinel that's just very fine-grained for any particular project or one that you're able to set up, whether that's around cost controls or general security or operational rigor. If you like OPA instead, you'll be able to do that. You want to be able to shell out to external systems. There's a concept called run tasks. You're able to then actually see who has done what and when and who's approved it through the visibility and optimization features and functionality, and things which I'll talk about. A couple of my favorite features are ones that might be compelling to you in a minute. But above and beyond that, people want to make sure that it's up, it's scalable, and it's available at all times, so that you can tweak and change your infra, that you are compliant with whatever regulatory systems you need, that you can call up and get support, and that it integrates with the rest of your systems, whether you're using Okta or you're using ServiceNow or otherwise. So let's go to the next slide. And I'm just going to show you a couple of these features. We're not going to walk through them in great detail, but these are some of the things that people look at when they start to look at the cloud or the enterprise editions. Workspaces is a way for you to be able to segregate your environments for the various different people, so that one team doesn't collide with another. Next slide. It's really just last month we launched with the enterprise products, the ability to have just-in-time provider authentication. So all of a sudden you can create credentials relatively quickly, inject them dynamically into a particular run, and then tear them back down at the end of the day. Next slide. The concept of continuous validation, which is something that's not necessarily as well defined within the industry, but let's say that I have a Packer image with a CVE. All of a sudden, I can revoke that CVE within HCP Packer, and I'll see exactly which systems are out of compliance, or the fact that my SSL certs are about to expire in 4 hours or in a day or in a month, whatever you set it to. It's ways to make sure that you can keep your fleet relatively healthy, and that it makes it a lot easier for you to maintain it over time. Next slide. Another one that's very popular is drift detection. So I spent all this time setting up my infrastructure as code and tweaked it and made sure it was perfect. And then somebody goes into the console and starts to click through and add new tags or tear tags off or change the amount of pods that it can scale up to. you're able to actually see based off of what your state is, what the intention was versus what it is out in the real world, and then get an email, a Slack, a notification via Teams, or kick off a webhook for some automation, but something that makes it pretty interesting for people to pick it up. Next slide. And then Arslan mentioned about policy as code and why you'd want it. Sentinel's great, and if you don't like Sentinel, next slide, there's also OPA with the ability to maintain and manage it and see what it actually looks like and which policies pass and which policies fail. Next slide. I think this is last but not least is cost estimation. So you have a team who likes to create quad extra large instances all the time versus something that's a little bit more modest. You're able to put them on an allowance and make sure that they can only build what they agree to within that doesn't break your budget. And next slide. So basically, it comes down to we love our open source community. We want to make sure that the ecosystem continues to grow and that people pick up and use the technologies as best they can. You have a couple of things that you need to make sure of that are not necessarily as concerning for small projects or teams, that when we get to the larger enterprises, when they want the collaboration and the compliance and the management and the ability to self-correct, and then to provide the ability for business agility without with guardrails so that they can mitigate the risk, is when we get to these teams in governance and business and those more commercial editions. And with that, I think I walked through some of the features and the 3 different types of consumptions, and some of the features that I typically like. There's a whole bunch of additional resources out there, but I'm going to pause right now. I think we're going to move into what I think we're all here for, Lauren, Q&A.
Amazing. Thank you both for that information that we just covered and everyone hanging around with us. Yes, so before we dive into the Q&A, we do just have a couple of final things to cover. Here are some additional resources, some upcoming events. We'd love to hear your feedback as well for future sessions, so you can use that feedback link. That's a link to a form at that second GCC event feedback form. Love to hear from you, future ideas, topics that we can dive into a little bit deeper, and we'd love to be able to put those on for you. And then again, here are some of those upcoming events and Hashi Days on June 13th, so you can check that out there. All right, so one last thing is the game. So thank you so much for your patience. I know a lot of you are staying up late wherever you are in the world. Here's a link to the game here. This is a certification prep game that you can earn badges, skill badges along the way, and increase your experience with Terraform on Google Cloud. So the link is in the chat right here, and there's that access code, Terraform_AMA. So please go ahead, get started. There's a limited time to participating in this, so you'll have just a few days, and those who are winning the first 3 to complete all of the games will get access to a free voucher for an infrastructure as code patterns and practices ebook that was written by our very own Rosemary Wang from HashiCorp Terraform. So thank you so much for that, for contributing the book itself, and for offering up those free vouchers. So we're excited to see you all participate in the game, and we'll definitely be in touch and following up with you on the access codes and additional information and resource from that game. So good luck, have fun, and we will be joining you there shortly. Okay, without further ado, let's hop into the Q&A. So we'll start with some that we received in advance. And then please, as we're going along, add in your questions into the chat and we'll be sure to get to them. Okay, so our first question is how to avoid a single point of failure with a state file used for the entire GCP project. And is there any way to build or provision the entire DR site from scratch on GCP when something happens to the live GCP region with Terraform?
I guess I can answer this one. Hi, everyone. I'm Rosemary. I'm one of the developer advocates at HashiCorp. I cover Terraform. I cover a lot of the other tools as well. But today we're talking infrastructure as code. So this is a topic that's really interesting. And it's very common to create a state file that has everything in it, right? That becomes a monolithic configuration on its own. And the risk with that, though, is that if you put everything in one state file, it actually increases the amount of time it takes to apply and make changes to those resources, right? Because it's a very large configuration with a lot of dependencies. And if you think about it, Terraform is going to traverse that dependency graph, and it will take a lot of time to traverse it. It's a lot of API calls as well. So the best thing you can do if you do want to avoid a single point of failure is to break out dependencies into different states with references to the project level configuration at minimum. So create the project, and your project itself will likely have the sufficient number of resources you need to divide it. And you want to further subdivide it into network and then the components running onto the network. That's a pretty common subdivision that you'll see in terms of states. So separating network component state away from other states tends to be the next minimum after that. This mitigates the overall blast radius of changes you'll make. So you can segment which components you're making changes to, and those are specifically isolated into their own state. So network in its own state, maybe a Kubernetes cluster in another, right? As for I guess, should I answer the second question, or are we going to?
Yeah. Yes,
okay.
Please.
Okay, sure. And there's a second part to the question, which is there any way to build, provision the entire DR site from scratch on GCP when something happens to the live GCP region with Terraform? There's a couple different ways to do that. The easiest way that you can think about doing this is to quite literally copy paste everything from the original site. But unfortunately, if you don't parameterize everything, it becomes a particularly challenging task, and it's very time consuming. So as you make optimizations early on by modularizing, parameterizing the values that you might make and you might pass in, including region, that makes it a lot easier to reproduce an entire DR site when something happens to one region. Now, whether or not you can capture a region or the live state of what's happening in a region, reproduce it in Terraform, and then deploy it again, there are ways that people do automate that. But it is more common to have modules or to have the configurations parameterized properly. And if you do need to flip over to a secondary site, you can simply copy paste, use the same module, and change all the parameters that you need. And this makes it a lot easier because you're only changing the lowest level set of resources that require that region parameter. Any dependencies that depend on those lower network components, for example, you might decide to dynamically pull them from other resources. So you don't have to pass region to every single resource. You might just choose to pass it to the lowest level of resources and then push those variables to other dependencies. So there's a lot of different ways to do it, but one of the best ways to do it is to just have good, clean infrastructure as code to start.
Amazing. Thank you, Rosemary. Okay, so we have one question that came in through the chat, so I want to make sure we're covering that. One of the questions is to see how is it easier to implement security products such as Cloud Armor using Terraform, or is it better to use Terraform, or is it Google Cloud Console a better option for it? And I think Barath, you may be able to help us with this answer.
Hey everybody, my name is Barath. I'm a solutions architect on Google Cloud, and I help maintain a lot of our open source Terraform modules. So for this question, configuring complex products that have like a lot of parameters, like Cloud Armor, for instance, could be easier via Terraform if you're familiar with the tool. When you use Terraform, you can see all the different parameters that you're passing in to the resource in a single file. So it's kind of easier to visualize how you're actually configuring the resource. And if you use something like Git or maybe a different version control system, you can see how the policy, the Cloud Armor policy, changes over time. So it could be good for auditability if you use Terraform. Another point is you could use Terraform to build some higher level abstractions. Like you can build a module around Cloud Armor policy, so it's a little bit more streamlined. The interface is a little bit more easier for users to use. We maintain a Cloud Armor module on Google Cloud Platform, which you may find useful. We can drop a link for that. So yeah, in general, try to use Terraform if possible, and if you're familiar with the tool.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Going back here. So what is the best non-HashiCorp CI/CD tool recommended by HashiCorp or Google for IAC pipelines with Terraform?
That sounds an interesting question as well, because there's not a best one that I can recommend. It heavily depends on an organization's approach to your infrastructure as code deployment. And most of the time, organizations aren't necessarily looking to adopt a new CI/CD tool, right? They want to consolidate on one tool. And the same tool to deploy services as well as deploy infrastructure. So much of the time, I will say that if you are interested in using a CI/CD framework that runs on Google specifically, it's a lot easier to use what is built in to Google to run Terraform, right? So the biggest thing that you'll want to keep in mind, especially from a security standpoint, is that any CI/CD tool you're going to use should have least privilege access to provision the minimum resources you need in Google. And that's the basis that you're going to want to start. The second thing you'll also want to look for is something that has a pipeline as code or templating capability. It makes it a lot easier to standardize stages for plan, apply, configuration scanning, testing, etc. when you have a template, a pipeline templating or a pipeline as code approach. And those are the two main requirements. Like I said, it just is a matter of your organization stance, as well as if you fulfill a security requirement for least privileged access to provision resources and templating so that you standardize stages related to Terraform.
Awesome. Thanks, Rosemary. Okay, so what is the right way to implement Terraform on GCP from scratch? I see many people have different opinions, but there should be a best practice for starting with Terraform from zero for an enterprise customer. Any thoughts here?
Yeah, so for enterprise customers getting started, we have a few options depending upon how familiar you are with Terraform and how much flexibility you would like to have along the way in terms of setting up your entire, landing zone. We have a console-based UI sort of product as an onboarding tool, which would be a good option for folks who are just getting started with Terraform. The good thing about this tool is that it walks you through all the different stages, starting from your groups and IAM and all of that visually in the console. So it's a little bit more easier for you to see all the different pieces involved. And then you can download as Terraform or deploy directly from the console. So this is a great way for folks who are just getting started. For more advanced users, you already know Terraform, you have worked with Terraform before. We have Cloud Foundation Fabric Fast, which is a landing zone template built with more flexibility and modular components. This is a great option if you really want to own all the code that goes into your landing zone. You want to make really minute tweaks to it and make it your own and deploy. This would be a great option for you. And finally, for some of our most security conscious customers, we also have the Security Foundations Blueprint, which offers out-of-the-box security best practices. So it's a little bit more secure, a little bit less flexible, but it is still for advanced customers who know Terraform and who are okay with diving into the code to make a few changes. So we can drop a link also for these resources in the chat so you can go check them out.
Awesome. Thanks, Bharath. And yep, we have the landing zone options link in the chat there, so you can check that out. Okay. What is HashiCorp's strategy regarding CDK-TF, specifically on Google Cloud? Can you share the roadmap and any suggestions for Google Cloud customers?
I can answer this from the HashiCorp side. So for those who are not familiar, CDK-TF is the Cloud Development Kit for Terraform. Cloud Development Kit for Terraform is developed on basically some TypeScript constructs. Currently, it offers Google Cloud as a pre-built provider. So we're tracking the latest version of 4.0 as of this Q&A. Yeah. We don't update the pre-built provider for major versions immediately, mostly because we want to make sure there are no breaking changes, especially the constructs themselves are heavily dependent on the provider and the resource schemas. I don't have any updates on the CDK-TF roadmap specific to Google Cloud. A lot of the work is focused on the core of CDK-TF, and we're continuing to grow support across programming languages.
Awesome. Appreciate that. Okay, one more question, and then we will hop into some of your additional questions in the chat. HashiCorp products are in use in enterprise companies and in the finance industry. How do you achieve to make Terraform as an industry standard when it comes to automation?
I'll take that one. So HashiCorp really hasn't deliberately tried to just focus the financial industry. We've seen adoption in enterprises based off of an intentional methodology we call a flywheel. First point is that we're trying to win the practitioner. So try to delight everyone on this call to make sure that they're heroes at home and rock stars at work can be able to be very, very successful building up their technology. 2 million downloads or installs daily. concepts like the CDKTF, which Rosemary just talked a little bit about. Go to developers.hashicorp.com. There's a lot of great resources that Arslan mentioned around it. We support HashiTalks and HashiCorp user groups all around the world. Ways in order to make sure that you're effective at your job and that you have a skill set that you can carry and build your careers on. Second major leg of that stool is how we focus on growing the ecosystem. It's not organic or accidental that there's 3,000 providers. So everything from the big cloud providers to your SaaS-based systems, your telemetry, your Datadogs, your AppDynamics, even to Domino's Pizza, you can actually have a provider that actually you can put into the system to order that pizza for yourself. We try to sustain and scale those and empower these ecosystem developers, and it's a great program out there for you to be able to get involved in if you can't find what you need. And then we democratize it by actually putting up a large registry that anyone can engage with the community to be able to pick up and push those pieces. And the last leg is to make sure that our enterprise customers are enabled. You know, there's a lot of features, much more than this day zero where you can stand up your system. The system lives for a very long time. So how do we make sure that they have the skill sets and the features so that they can scale and audit and maintain regulatory compliance? And that might actually be one of the reasons why financial industry, more so some of the others, is important. And considering that most financial industries are organizations of relatively large sizes, whether by intention or by accident, they'll be either hybrid or they'll have GCP as a primary cloud and potentially one of those other clouds as a secondary. It gives you a consistent way to be able to manage and maintain that whole estate from the same sets of workflows and skill sets that you'll be developing.
Awesome. Thanks for that answer. Okay, we have one question here. Do we have any way to create a copy of existing GCP projects using Terraform and Google Storage?
I can take a shot at it if you want. So Mahesh, if you meant that you wanted to kind of start managing an existing GCP product with Terraform, you're probably thinking about a way to import that existing resource into your Terraform state. Terraform has some great docs on how to do it, but we also have functionality built on gcloud called Export Terraform that will let you automatically generate some Terraform configs for the said project. So you can target that at the project level and say, export configs for this project, and that will generate a bit of Terraform for you and some import commands. That will let you import all the state details that Terraform needs to manage that project going forward. Now, if your question was, I have an already existing project, I want to make an exact copy of that same project using Terraform, this is also the same way you would do it, except don't just import that project, just keep that Terraform configuration and recreate it, and that should work.
Awesome. Thanks, Bharath. Okay. Our next question is, Google Cloud has a solution for IAC called Deployment Manager. Because of multi-cloud capabilities, Terraform is mostly being chosen by the users. Terraform is killing the deployment manager usage. Maybe it would cause a sunset of the deployment manager. What do you think about it?
I think it's a great question. It's funny because I'm the Terraform PM. I might be a little biased, right? I think there's a lot of value to Terraform, but Google Cloud's deployment manager is still a supported solution today for managing your GCP infrastructure. But a lot of customers are preferring Terraform, right? And it's specifically because it's multi-cloud capable, the provider ecosystem that Ray mentioned, right? And as a result, we recommend Terraform to a lot of our customers. We're working on a maturity model for Terraform on GCP, which will help customers understand what tool is best fit for them. Because Terraform may not be for everyone, but I think for the large majority of folks, Terraform is the right choice. Regarding sunsetting of deployment manager, I don't think we'll do that right now. I don't think that's something that I can speak to today, because we'll continue to support deployment manager for quite a while, I think, because there's a lot of customers using it today, and our marketplace deployments are all actually backed by DM as well, right? So I don't see us changing that anytime soon. And DM is also a good choice for some users who want simple deployments and they don't want to maybe they're just getting started and they don't really want to get into Terraform yet. So it is an option for them. However, Terraform is the de facto standard, right, to provision infrastructure today. I don't think that's going to change for quite some time. So in my humble opinion, I think that it's a great choice for you if you're, you go into production and you're managing large environments. It probably is the best option for you. We are discussing like the future of DM and like what it looks like and all of that, but like we're doing a lot of customer research. We're talking to them and trying to figure out like, what the best path forward is. But I think it's too early to say that, it's going to be sunset at this point. So I think what's most important here is, Google is all in on Terraform. We're doing a lot more for Terraform and supporting our customers there, which I've noticed like a lot of customers are very happy to kind of hear that. And we've always been doing it for a while, but we're leaning in a lot more today. So hopefully that answers and addresses the question.
Awesome. Thanks, Arslan. And
Sure.
it looks like we had a follow-up to the previous question, just asking more specifically around data. So maybe Rosemary and Bharath, if you have any additional context here around this.
Do you want to go first, Rosemary?
Nah, you probably have a better sense of it.
Yeah, so I assume that you're talking about stateful resources like SQL database or things that you may already have within that project. Using that export command, you can see what are all the different resource types that are supported for export functionality. So you can validate that these stateful resources with data can still be converted to Terraform. And then going forward, you can manage that resource using Terraform. So there's no reason to, sort of lose that data. Now, if you were talking about how to create an exact clone with all the data in a brand new project, that is going to be trickier. You'll need to write some custom automation for that to migrate data from, let's say, one database to another database.
Yeah. And to add on to that, it's pretty common for folks to ask the question, can't Terraform just migrate the data for me? The answer is no. The data is in those stateful resources. It's owned by those stateful resources. Terraform has no awareness of it. So unless you have either, there's a provider that for some reason or other allows you to import that information, usually, as Beth pointed out, you'll need additional automation. This tends to take the form of whatever your target technology, that stateful technology is. They'll have snapshotting capability, recovery, backup, etc. You'll have to add those automation components yourself. Some people do embed that within Terraform configuration for better or for worse with provisioners. Other times they'll do this out of band with separate automation.
Awesome. Hope that helps. Thanks. Okay, going back. How to enable API of the GCP service resource using Terraform for the first time. Can you give descriptive code for it or a direct source where to find it, or how to use the public registry of Terraform for GCP as modules and just make changes to TFRs?
I can start with this. If you're using the enable API, there is a resource for it. It's the Google Project Service resource. So you can use that. Sometimes you can set a list of services you want enabled for the project, loop over it with counter for each. The list makes it easier just so that way you can review and check what services you have enabled across multiple projects. The second part of the question has used public registry of Terraform for GCP modules and just make changes to TFRs. There's no direct way to pass variables from a configuration into a module, right? So you do have to in Terraform, you have to make a definition of the variable. You have to define the variable, and then you have to pass the variable interpolated to the input of the module. So there's no direct way to say, here's TFRs, and we'll map that one-to-one exactly to the inputs of a module. What I do recommend is naming the variables the same as the module's variables and just setting as many opinionated defaults as possible. It makes it easier, so you only specify the absolute necessary ones in your TFRs file, and setting some opinionated defaults makes it easier to standardize, especially if you're sharing this module. Bharath, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, we also have an opinionated module for enabling a bunch of services together. It's called the project services module, services plural, and allows you to pass in a list like Rosemary recommended. One of the nice things about that module is in addition to enabling the API, it also enables you to create some of the API identities. API identities are usually principles that different services use to run things on behalf of users. So being able to force create those identities are useful because then you can manage the IAM permissions and things like that for those service identities also via Terraform. That's
awesome. And yep, we just dropped a link to the project services module into the chat. It looks like there is a quick follow-up on this one. I was also curious whether there is a reason that GCP has this requirement of enabling API for using the resources as compared to Azure or AWS.
Maybe I can take this. So a lot of our enterprise customers, what I've seen is that they like to sort of restrict what kind of products can be used, and API enablement is one way of making that easier. So let's say, for instance, you are a big organization and you don't want folks using one particular product. It makes it easier for enterprises to then say, you need to explicitly have a role to enable an API. So if you don't have that role, it's hard for you to enable that API. And hence you can kind of log down on what kind of products are used. This is often needed for like compliance reasons or maybe other requirements. That is one reason that I can think of that may be the reason why we have this enabling the API feature. There has been points of friction too that I've heard from customers, and maybe this is something that we can bring back to the product team in charge of this enablement feature and ask them if they have any thoughts on improving this for customers.
Awesome, thanks, Bharath. Okay, so our next question is there any plan to review GCP provider resources attributes consistent names? Today may change per provider, like network. For some resources can reference VPC, and other resources IP address ranges.
I could take this one. So it's not really planned at the moment, but most of the inconsistencies that are present are actually in the GCP APIs. And so Terraform will be consistent with those. So my assumption is that as we improve those inconsistencies within the APIs, we'd see improvements in the provider. There's a lot of work that we are doing to kind of, like I said in the past, like, making sure Terraform is up to date with all our APIs. So this is maybe something else we can also take back to the product team.
Awesome. Is there a possibility of adding, removing, or updating annotations to Secret Manager secrets via Terraform? Is this feature going to be included in the roadmap soon?
I could take this one as well. It's a great question. I don't have an actual update on this specific feature. There are a lot of features being requested. But however, like I did mention early on, right in the beginning, that we are working to make sure that our service teams are responsible for Terraform coverage. So what that means is that over time, you're going to see, a faster response time on us kind of resolving some of these features and, these bug fixes and everything else. So I expect this to be looked at some point. If this is something you need urgently and it's blocking you, feel free to reach out to us, or if you have an account team attached, like reach out to the account team, and then we can definitely bring that to our, to the engineering team's attention, right? And we can see how we can prioritize it.
Sounds good. All right. Recommendations for Terraform provisioning architecture with different cloud providers or environments. And I think this also encompasses a question that we got from the chat. So I'll leave this for the group.
Yeah, so it is, as much as we all wish it, unfortunately, there's no one uniform data model that is sort of like if you declare one resource in Terraform, you could do it across all three in the same way or on multiple clouds that you have. So what you'll have to do, and what I do recommend, is to split each cloud provider into its own state. And it's really tempting sometimes to put multiple cloud providers in the same state, because then you say, oh, I have one view, I can pass the same variables in. The reason why you do not want to do that is that you don't want to support changes across all of your cloud providers at the same time. Sometimes you may do out-of-band changes for different cloud providers, and putting them all in the same state means that you start to create this monolithic configuration where it takes forever to apply, and you're also making API calls to all of your cloud providers. So when should you put multiple cloud providers in the same configuration? These happen usually with the components that are bordering each other. So this could be a VPN connection. It could be, it could be cluster connection that you need that information across multiple cloud providers. That would be more important for you to put into the same configuration, but you don't do that often. So in general, if you do structure your Terraform, I usually start with different states for different cloud providers. you also want to use the same kind of module approach to splitting lower level components from higher level components, networking, project resources, identity access management. There are ways that you can, what I call a prototype module. So for identity and access management, if you are trying to manage this across multiple cloud providers, you can offer what is called a prototype module, where you map a list or a map of values that you need and you know to be true across multiple cloud providers, and you'll call separate modules in separate state using that prototype list. So a good example of this is that if I know I have a set of read-only users that I want to pass across AWS, Azure, Google, all three, I would declare that in one module and then pass the outputs of that to the three of them, and then map and transform to the appropriate identity access management resources on each provider. So splitting them all separately, prototyping when you can and when you're able to will help a lot. And modularizing will help ensure that any changes you are making, you're able to scale across multiple resources and across each of those providers. Just avoid putting them all in the same configuration at once.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that response and for some additional context in the chat. I appreciate it. Okay. So our next one here is general overall best practices and question here. Why would you use Terraform on Google Cloud? How to use it? Could you do a migration example? And I think we could probably have an entire session on this, but maybe Arslan, you want to take a stab at this response?
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, I am biased. Why would you use it? I think that there's like lots of reasons. But the top three that come to mind is, it's infrastructure as code. Like if you're doing that today, I think that you already understand the value of that. But if you're not, right, like HCL, which is the language you use for Terraform, like it's a declarative language, which means like you ask for what you want, and Terraform figures out like how to do it. Like you don't have to codify every single thing and every instruction of like what to create first, second, third, etc. So like Terraform does a great job at that. And at the end of the day, it's code, right? So like all the benefits of code, you get that, with Terraform as well, and for your infrastructure. So like it's well documented. You have version control. You can have rollback. You have approval. So you have a bunch of different benefits there in terms of IAC. The second is, I would say, multi-cloud. Like that's a huge one. And so I think customers don't want different tools to manage their infrastructure. Like I think that's pretty clear. There might be some use cases where you do want different tools, and I think some customers do that. But having a single workflow to deploy all your resources onto any one of your clouds, I think that's super powerful. You have one workflow, and then you just change the code in the backend, right? So if you're creating a VM in Google or another cloud provider, like you can still create that VM. The code may change in the back end, right? But at the same time, it's like it's creating a VM for you using one single tool, which is really awesome. And then I think the last one is like it's well supported. So like I mentioned before, like I don't see Terraform going anywhere for a really long time. Ray mentioned the providers, like the numbers just keep growing and growing. I don't know any other tool that has that type of ecosystem, right? When it comes to Terraform. So thinking from the customer's perspective, I think it's just something that you can rely on. It's you can trust that it'll be around for a while. So I think that's a huge win for Terraform. How you do that? I mean, there's various ways. Obviously you can deploy using open source Terraform, right? And so the way I typically explain it is Terraform open source is free like a puppy. You can get that puppy, and then you got to take care of that puppy, and then you got to feed it. You got to do a bunch of things with it. But a lot of customers prefer open source, right? And so for various reasons. But then you also have Terraform Enterprise, which also provides you like a UI, an API, and all these other bells and whistles. That's going to just get you from 0 to 100 really, really fast. And you have this centralized platform that you can use. And so that's definitely a great option. We'll follow up with some documentation and resources and stuff. And we also have like quick labs, which I think are called Cloud Skill Boost now, and instructor-led training that I mentioned before, right? So like how to use it. I mean, there's lots of documentation online. We can share that. And lastly, like in terms of migration, I think Bharat did a great job at explaining like in terms of migrations, you have something living, and this might be two-part question, I think. Like if you're migrating from another provider or like a cloud provider, then the story is a little different, where like you just have to replicate that deployment on Google, there is some work involved. You have to kind of make sure you migrate the right components at the right time and in the right order, et cetera, right? But you need to create some sort of Terraform configurations there. And if the question is like, how do I migrate existing GCP resources to manage with Terraform, right? That's basically what Bharath explained on using our bulk export tool and to basically export all your configuration. It'll create all the Terraform files for you, and then you can import that into Terraform to make sure like Terraform is now managing your existing state or existing configurations within Google Cloud. So definitely a lot more that we could probably share on this, but hopefully that covers this one.
Great. Thanks, Arslan. Okay. I think we have two questions that might go together. So one is, what is the best practice for developing, debugging, and troubleshooting a Terraform script? Often a Terraform script will plan successfully and then fail to apply. What are good practices to avoid these situations? And then there is a follow-up on that around that we got in the live chat. Could you touch upon TDD with Terraform? What's the best practices to test your deployment afterwards?
So I can maybe take the first part. So the general recommendation for developing Terraform is often to iterate locally, use your normal Terraform validate and plan. But like the second part of the question says, there are a certain class of errors that only occur when you try to apply the script. These are hard to catch because a lot of these apply time failures tend to be API errors. So this could be due to, let's say, an API server-side validations, IAM permissions are missing, or some other internal errors that the API sort of gives back to the provider and they're surfaced back via the Terraform CLI. And the only way to sort of detect these two is to actually create these resources, like really create these resources in a test environment. We have a best practices for testing section in one of our public cloud.google.com docs that lay out some of the possible tools you could use for this, including one of our integration testing tools called the Blueprint Test Framework, which is based off of TerraTest, which is another popular Terraform testing library. The other thing we're also trying to do is to shift some of these validations left. So the GCP provider tries to shift some of these left into the provider so you can actually catch these during Terraform validate. So if you use like a special character that is not supported in a resource name, the provider can then surface an error back at validate time. So helping reduce those apply time failures a little bit.
Yeah. And I think the second question, this live question that popped up was about TDD. I think it's TDD, so test-driven development. And it's really hard to do test-driven development in its truest form or its most ideal form with Terraform because with infrastructure, you don't know the result until after you've applied it to the API. So as Bharath mentioned, used integration testing or end-to-end testing with whatever framework you have. Those will help with post-deployment. You can try to write those up front. At the very least, you can write functional tests up front. For example, if you know that you should be able to access a web application and end on a load balancer plus with a service running on Kubernetes and that network, well, you can create an end-to-end test that tests that. And you can do that early because you want to issue an HTTP request and get information back. So that's functionally something you can do before you write any infrastructure as code. And that's something you could do it in true TDD form. But really we do, and I borrow this from someone else's, and I can't quite remember, but test-driven refactor. So if you are finding yourself working on infrastructure as code, you run the test, it doesn't work, then you refactor the infrastructure as code. And that's more of the style that we do now. But you can do a lot more TDD-driven approach with unit testing. So that's shifting left, right, testing for values. That could be security testing as well. So there are a couple different pieces to this. You can also do post-deployment tests with various testing tools as well. So you've a lot of variety of traditional testing tools that you can apply to infrastructure.
Amazing. And yep, here's a link to some documentation around testing that you can check out. One additional follow-up to this, unless we've already covered it, but is how to approach Terraform destroy that fails in the middle.
That might need some additional clarification. If you have destroy that fails in the middle, it does happen, right? And that means, let's say a resource doesn't fully destroy, or it's not completely let's say it's not been some dependencies have not been completely decoupled. It does happen. For example, you might be deleting a network resource and it doesn't fully delete. Part of this is investigating what the state is. Usually that error message will determine what your next course of action is. Oftentimes you can run a Terraform destroy again. If you're really committed to destroying all those resources, if you run a Terraform destroy again, Terraform will go back and pick up from where it left off. It will try to destroy those resources and identify the ones that are still available. Sometimes the destroy still doesn't work because there are other dependencies that exist and an API is returning an error for that. So on occasion, you may have to manually go in and remove that resource sort of out of band as sort of a break glass approach, and then rerun Terraform destroy again, in which case Terraform will identify that that resource has been removed and it will remove it from state. So in this case, you can run destroy again. If it still doesn't work, go back manually and do a break glass change to remove that resource that is the API might be hung up on.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And yeah, if there is any additional clarification or context to that question, feel free to drop that in and we'll be sure to follow up with it. And we do just have a little bit less than 4 minutes left. So I know we have a lot of questions still coming in the works, but we will be including them all in that recap post. So stay tuned and thanks for your patience, but we'll try to get through a few others here before we close out today. So one additional one is, can Terraform be used in any BI tool, or how might data engineering benefit from it?
I can take that one. Terraform, you can use Terraform with BI tools in a few different ways, right? If you're using, if you need to configure a BI tool, you could find an available Terraform provider for it. It may or may not be available. It may be someone built by the community. It may be built by a vendor. So it's sort of dependent on which tool you're using. It's an easier way to, it's easy to use Terraform as a provider to set up dashboards or other configurations for that BI tool and then reproduce it if you have different environments or different instances. The other thing that you might consider doing, some people have mentioned this to me before, you can retrieve data from Terraform state, and the state reflects a bit of like a source of truth. So what people will do is they'll retrieve all of the state information from multiple Terraform state configurations and put that into a BI tool. It reflects a bit of like a source of truth for configuration or their infrastructure inventory. It's JSON metadata. So for the most part, on the BI tool side, it will involve some parsing as well as some initial configuration to retrieve that information from state. With respect to data engineering, Terraform is used to set up data pipelines or jobs. If you're on Google, for example, you can set up various data pipelines, processing jobs. For less dynamic environments, it's particularly useful for expressing relationships between components that you might set up for ingestion or consumption. So if you have data coming from somewhere and you need components to go somewhere else, it's often useful for taking information about where the data is coming from and then where it's going to go next, but it's not going to deal with the data directly, right? So it will predominantly involve configuration of those components or resources used for data processing or pipelines, but it won't necessarily directly process the data itself.
Makes sense. All right. Is there a high-level blueprint language wrapper that can generate Terraform for you?
I think the best answer, Rosemary, correct me if I'm wrong, would be suggesting CDKTF. This way we can meet you with the language you know already. You understand what these constructs are. You can still write in Java, TypeScript, Python, .NET, what have you. But I think some of the chats did recommend the fact of be careful about what you do with that and how much you do that at scale, just because you really need to understand exactly what the nuances are and test it thoroughly. That would be the recommendation. Thanks, Cole.
Yeah, I was on mute, but I was just going to say something similar. Like I think everybody just wants that one click, does everything for you. It works sometimes, but it won't work oftentimes. So with that said, I have seen other tools come out there that kind of offer and promise like it'll do a lot of this stuff for you. There's pros and cons to it. But I think using modules and like being able to take some modules it's a little bit longer of a process, right? But it gives you what you want. Like you have some existing modules that exist, you take that and then you kind of modify it, incorporate best practices inside of it that fits for your organization. And then you use that to deploy things again and again and again, right? And it just makes that process a lot easier. It's a great question, but I don't think we've solved that problem yet, like collectively, like as a whole, right? Like just in cloud deployments at the time. And if somebody does have an answer, let us know which products they are, because I'd love to read about them.
And just to add to that, there are certain products like HPC Toolkit is one from Google that generates snippets of Terraform for you. It's not, for instance, like a case where you can give it an arbitrary high-level language and then it will generate Terraform. It only does it for specific use cases. So those kind of tools do exist and you may find it useful. But at the end of the day, Terraform HCL is supposed to be human written and, parsable by humans. So it's expected that humans are, at the end of the day, writing and consuming it.
And honestly, it's literally HashiCorp configuration language. So tries to fit that bill as a high level blueprint language for your infrastructure itself.
Awesome. All right. We are at time, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but wanted to say thank you so much for joining us, everyone, all of our speakers. Really appreciate you taking the time to share this information and answer so many questions. As a final reminder, we will be publishing a recap post in the Google Cloud community, and a link to that is below. So stay tuned. We'll be getting to all of your questions that we weren't able to address live. And then as a final reminder is that certification prep game. So we'd love to play along with you, win a free voucher to Rosemary's ebook on IAC. And yeah, learn, grow your experience, get hands-on with Terraform. We'd love to participate and see all of the winners. So, and just lastly, I see like some questions in the chat around the video. Yes, please. This is available on demand right away after we finish today. So you can use the same link that you're using to watch right now to watch this on demand. But we'll also be sharing that in the community with the links to all of the resources that we covered and the written Q&A. So with that, just wanted to say thanks again, everyone. Do you have any final thoughts? Ray, Arslan, Rosemary, Broth, anyone, or recommendations before we close out today?
Thanks for the time. Good luck, everyone.
Same here. Yeah, just thank you all for joining, and thanks for the time. And feel free to reach out to us, right? If you have any comments, suggestions, we're definitely open. Especially like on my end, like I'm the PM for Terraform. We're here to make your journey better. And if we're doing something wrong, let us know. And if we're doing something right, give us a thumbs up as well. So we're happy to take that feedback.
100%. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. We hope to see you next time. And until then, I hope you have a good rest of your day, evening, wherever you're from in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.